and welcome back to Reimagine Together, a live communal conversation series, whatever you want to call it, lots of media on new paradigm leadership and how to co-create new paradigm societies. And every week I get to go live with awesome friends, guides, and have conversations about different parts of the new leadership journey and different parts of new paradigm society. And today I bring back wonderful, brilliant, creative pattern investigator, Breean Miller. Watch her past episodes below. We have a whole conversation series on healing, quote unquote, work. And those links are below. Links to follow the show, all kinds of stuff is below this video. So if you are interested, please like, subscribe, share, and connect with us in the other links available. And let's just go ahead and jump in. We've got a fun episode today.
Yeah, a fair warning. Thank you again, Carly, for having me on. But fair warning, my husband said, and there's a dog, of course. And my husband, if there's a big kerfuffle in about a half an hour, it's because he got home and the dogs all ran out of the room. So not much I can do about that with my current
like a live show without dogs.
setup. But, this is real life. So
yes, it is.
There we are.
Interrupted. Okay, well, today we wanted to talk about something that both Bree and I, as INFPs, we're both INFPs.
Oh, yeah.
We want to talk about what kind of rethinking the self and the concept of identity as we expand and really go into more evolved ways of looking at what the self means and how it participates in the concept of the collective. And tools, all of these crazy, awesome tools that are available to explore not just our psychology, but really our energy and our biology and this other. And so we're going to talk about what gene keys. Bree does all kinds of stuff with that. Human design, astrology charts, Myers-Briggs, DISC. There's a bunch of them. So we'll list them out and do a review of how to use them at the end. But first, let's just have a little chit chat on rethinking the self, whether it's the dog self or the human self. Oh,
he's like such a poser, I swear to God. Anytime there's a camera around, he's posing for it.
Oh, cute.
This is Teddy, everyone. Teddy Two Toots.
Hi, Teddy. In the combo as well.
Teddy's in the combo.
Bree, what do you think? What's your journey been with this the self, so to speak? How
okay.
You thought about it in the past? I know. Let's try to do a summary.
Yeah. Can you help me out with that question? Because you're like, what do you think the self is? Earlier we were prepping and I'm like, I don't know. How am I supposed to answer that? None of us can answer that. No one is qualified to answer that.
Where has your journey been with what you may have thought even recently? So if we say because there's been a lot of changes in the last few years.
Yeah.
What you thought about the self 2 years ago and how maybe that has kind of changed even in just the last 2 years.
Yeah, maybe 2 years ago, I thought that the self was definitely something that you could shape based on how you wanted to show yourself to the world. And I don't mean that in a super ego-driven, like I want to put on a mask way. What I mean by that is you always want to be a better, different, more version of yourself, of who you already are. And I think that we're always seeking like new behaviors and new ways to show up and impress other people. So it's almost like an external, like a projected version of yourself, if that makes any sense. So it's almost like I want to show up this way because society is kind of mirrored to me that that's what helps you get attention and recognized and money and love and all of these things. You're worthy if you show up this certain way. That means whatever I have now, I want to work toward being like that. So there's like this process of certainly I can change myself, but it's like to be this ideal version of a human, or like what society says is what a successful human looks like. It was much less, I feel like my thinking, and this was, I would say, more than 2 years ago. I'm going back a little further, but I just think it's good to anchor in this idea of you feel like you can shape yourself into whatever you need to in order to be successful.
Right.
And so the sense of authentic self and really knowing and trusting what's inside, that didn't exist in my world several years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I mean, and just to bring a few things to the front also as it comes to work, because Bree works in branding, I work in branding, and a lot of this, what I'm hearing also, and we see everywhere, is a lot around the curation of the self. And so you're creating a self, you're looking at the external landscape, in a kind of, I'd say the oldest version, or what a lot of us feel is sometimes we're told who we are. And so we are that. And then when we get quote unquote empowered, we look at the external world and we go, I want to be according to what is successful, admired. I want to be validated. And so I'm going to curate a self that can be validated by this external world.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like so many of the tools reflect to you that version of you.
Right.
So I'm excited to get into that.
Yeah.
But I would say the other thing is we're all trying to feel like worthy of existing. And so there is this like projection to go after, basically. So it's a little bit like that. And then later on, it becomes this like, you become a pile of questioning attributes. I feel like that's the best way to put it. Like the more you start to work on yourself from that position I described earlier, the more honestly you become like a giant pot of soup and you don't know what the heck is going on. You don't know who you are. You're like, what is this mess in here? You feel like an imposter. And where you used to have like some sense of confidence around how you showed up, it's almost like now you know that you were full of shit before.
Right.
You know that you know nothing. And so there is this like weird nebulous period where you're just kind of a squishy ball of goo. And you're like, I have no idea who I actually am, because I've based all of my existence so far in what I was told to be, like you said, or shown to be in our family and society, or, sought to be based on what was successful and what we thought we wanted to be when we grew up or become when we were older.
Right.
So that goo stage is really fraught with a lot of uncertainty and doubt, and it's not particularly a fun place to be. And I feel like a lot of people dip their toe into that and then retreat.
Yeah. Yeah.
They retreat.
Yeah.
That is not, you kind of have to walk through the forest to get to the other side a little bit there.
Yep.
I'm sure you've experienced that, Carly.
Every day. I'm like, the only part I'm like, is like, the goose stays.
The goo stays. Yeah. You're still like wiping the goo off every day.
Well, and there's this, I think, what I'm hearing, and as I think of it too, is like, there's this stripping away period, as we call like the deconditioning or the disruption of the self, that when you start to really ask, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And then we could look at a lot of meditative practices and Buddhism to where we get to the point of like, I'm no one.
Yeah.
Right? And that's that goo, like that. That's like the blah. Who am I without this concept of self and identity, and like, am I just nothing?
Yeah. I know there was definitely a stage when I was in the goo where I started to use all of these self-discovery tools, these personality assessments and things like that, because one, it was a way to almost validate parts of myself that I secretly wanted to be true. Right. I secretly wanted other people to be like, yeah, I see that in her. And so it was a little bit of a validation. There was a level of feeling seen and like you're not alone. So like some of these personality tools, when we get into them later, it's like, ooh, I'm an INFP too. We're super rare. Let's chit chat about that. And there's like some semblance of not feeling so isolated and alone. Yeah. And but at the same time, I feel like I started to over-identify with some of these things. And then you can very easily fall into the rabbit hole or the trap, I guess, of becoming attached. And then that becomes a limit for you.
Correct.
So you use it for an excuse and you say, that's how I am. Or I'm going to show up in this meeting the way I do. And you might not do this consciously, but it's like, I'm an Enneagram 8. So that's, I'm bossy and direct, deal with it. Or any other number of ways that you could limit yourself by being attached to a personality assessment as your identity, or your astrological sign as your identity. And then you're just fixed there. And I think that these are great tools for self-awareness and self-discovery, which is why we're talking about them. But honestly, every single one of them, except for a few rare exceptions, does a really terrible job of helping you integrate and become a healthier version of yourself, and actually using that information to be better, to like fully step into your authentic self. And I know that's like such a buzzword, authentic self, but it's true. It's like a fully embodied, another buzzword, version of yourself, where you're not trying to project out something else, but you're also not triggered by things or unconscious of all of these patterns and biases that you have collected over the years. Like you start to get aware of all that. A lot of these systems don't do a good job of saying, hey, this is just information. Here's how to use it, or here's a path for using it for self-development. And I've seen this especially in teams. You talked about like how we talk about healing work. Here's another example. Work all around the globe is giving people these personality assessments. We do it at Habits at Work. We use the Enneagram, and people don't necessarily use it in a positive way. We use it to pigeonhole people, or to be like, here's how I have to interact with Julie because she is a thinker. And, like, I'm going to talk to Julie this way, as opposed to like, yes, maybe understanding that as some type of orientation that Julie has. And then also recognizing Julie is an infinite person, just like you. And that by over-identifying her with a certain type or way of being, you're placing limits on Julie before Julie even shows up. So we do this to ourselves using the personality assessments. We will also do it to other people. We also use it to put limits on other people, which is just like maddening,
Kind of what it makes me think of is where we can get into problems with any kind of self, or even as you're even using the words like embodied, overused, authentic self. Like, what is that thing that we're pointing to? It becomes a trend. Why? Because it becomes obsessed with the ego. It becomes exploited because it becomes commoditized, and another way of us labeling and trying to get certainty from the exact. It's like how we corrupt and pervert just all of these tools that are actually meant to expand and create more space and uncertainty. And evolve. And instead it's like, I want the answers. It's
right.
Contracting and fear-based.
And tell me who I am, please. God, tell me who I am.
Without you. So it's so important, which is why we wanted to have this dialogue on rethinking the self prior to looking at some of these tools. Because we can get our ego and our fear and our can really get over attached to things that are meant to be a trampoline into all possibilities of and to help us to really, as you're saying too, right, instead of me labeling you and now putting you in a box, instead it's going to help me. What it can do is help me to appreciate that other people have different patterns. And so, oh my God, I should be just as interested in other people's patterns as I am in my own. Because there are other patterns out there. People see the world differently. What?
They do?
If they actually think for themselves, we actually have different perspectives.
Oh my goodness. What are we going to do with that?
What are we going to do? We're not all the same.
So I'm curious, Carly, of all the systems or tools, or I don't even know what we're calling these things, tools, I guess.
Yeah.
Of all the tools that we chatted about maybe discussing today, what do you think is the most limiting one, or the one that you maybe got the least out of? Or I'm curious from your perspective. Maybe we start like, let's start at the bottom and go to like the top or something. We can like get through and be like, what are the pros and cons?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think?
That's a great question. I tend to always like see how things generally. It's a great question that I'm struggling to answer. I think the personality ones,
Yeah,
can be the most limiting, just because our personality is the most superficial part of ourselves. That usually is just from early like life sort of shit. And so it speaks to some of these energy, like some of these much more specific impulses, or much bigger impulses. But it also is very limiting in like, I'm just a very organized person. Like, I just like organizing things.
mm-hmm.
And somebody who's in this personality type is like super disorganized. And it's just not like, I don't know, they can just be a little bit more superficial.
Yes.
But I don't know that it's necessarily the test itself, or again, just how we're using it.
Well, that's a good point, because I think that you could say that about any of the tools that we talk about today. Like, look at astrology, for example. Most people just know what their sun sign is.
Right.
They're like, this doesn't make sense to me. I don't identify with this. And it's like, guys, it's way more complicated than that. You know, like, that's like the party trick, you know? Or maybe if you're in California, it's knowing like your sun and your moon and your ascendant. That's the party trick. Like, but there's so much beyond that. Okay. But the same is true for, I think, all of these systems, probably.
Exactly.
But some of them do a better job than others.
Totally.
About like, really, again, like I said, helping you. I feel like some of the ones that don't do a great job, or for me, like Myers-Briggs, I feel like is really limited.
Yep.
I feel like that one, it's kind of obtuse. Language is unfamiliar, like it is in many of these things. But I also feel like it's, even no matter how much I read on it, it's still really incomprehensible. And it really does feel like one of those where it's like, okay, we've identified you as this. There is like no path forward for that. And again, people just use it to say like, yeah, I'm an INFP. And that means I have like a million thoughts going at once and can create a whole bunch of stuff and have a great imagination. And I'm introverted. Like, thanks. That on some level makes me feel special and validated.
Right.
But then what? What do I do with that information?
Exactly.
So like, what do you think about Myers-Briggs?
Yeah, I would totally agree with it. With that, I mean, I do think out of all of them, I'd say that's probably the most limiting. Maybe the DISC profile as well. Some of the ones that are used in work. Yeah. But I think what's limiting, again, yes, is when we try to understand it as individualization, like an astrology chart, for example, which is highly, or human, like these other systems that are so comprehensive and so individualized, like based on all of these. It's like nobody has the same astrology chart. Right? Like it's like a fingerprint. Like nobody has the same energy signature of the stars. Yeah. Whereas these, if it's the Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram, they're helping you to identify like larger patterns that you fit into with other people. So when we try to associate it or think of it as like, I want to define myself, instead of understanding like, again, it's how you can understand groups. That's how I'm more, it's just to be aware of, what does it mean to be introverted or extroverted? I'm more interested in like understanding the concepts, and then I think they're helpful. And then people can, and just bringing that to awareness, but it's not who you are. It's just simply understanding that you tend to fall on a spectrum in these areas.
And it just really describes your default.
Exactly.
It describes your unconscious patterns.
Yeah.
And your biases. That's it. That's what it describes. Yeah. So it's like it's taking a magnifying glass to all of your shit.
Yeah.
That you may or may not know that you have. if you answer it honestly, and then it's going to be like, here's your default. And there's the other dog. They're all on camera today, folks. Yeah, but I feel like then people get attached to it. And they're like, well, this is how I am. And I'm an introvert. No, like actually, I don't personally feel like that's a thing.
Right.
If I'm being honest, I feel like there are people definitely that get more energy from being around other people in large groups or small groups or one-on-one. And there are definitely people that feel like energy is being taken from those in those situations and need more time to recharge by themselves. And that's a balance. And every single individual has a different version of that on a different day, during a different week, during a different time in their life. I feel like the idea of introvert versus extrovert is one of those things that's so limiting for people, that we identify with it. And then they're like, I don't want to do these things because I'm this. And it's just like, we're missing out on so much life because we've decided that we fall into a certain class.
Yeah.
And it's really on default. And it's something that you can definitely change and might change throughout your life also. For me, that's one of those, it's like probably contentious out there in the world. But it's really habit-based. And that one seems so funny to me that it's part of these, part of the Myers-Briggs.
Yeah. What do you think about how it's used? Because it has a strong overlap with the Enneagram. So kind of bringing in your thoughts on the Enneagram and the concept of what, like, where do you think the kind of the weaknesses of the Enneagram and what you think the strengths are of using it?
Well, I feel like my experience, at least, and I'm obviously no expert in Myers-Briggs, but I feel like it's very much, here's a paragraph about what each one of these letters means. This is what you are. There might be like a little bit more than that, depending on what service you use. But the Enneagram for me gets a little bit more complicated. It, I feel like overall has the position that we all possess qualities of all of these types, but we have a dominant type. And the dominant type really identifies for us our underlying motivation, our core motivation, and therefore our core wounds and coping mechanisms that we created throughout our childhood and early adolescence that we perpetuated after that, that give us a total orientation of the world.
Right.
So it classifies it into 9 different kind of dominant types. And then you can have, subtypes and wings and, like trigrams and all these different things that bring your unique expression to life. So it gets a little bit more subtle. It gets into like, if you are better one-on-one, or if you have a self-preservation instinct, or you are maybe like an 8 with a more dominant wing 9, like I am typically, and that would be expressed differently than someone that maybe swings the other way. It's just a little bit more fluid, I find. And then the reporting, depending on, of course, the service that you use, and if you use a coach or not, or whatever, the books that are written about it for integrating the work into your life are much more nuanced and provide a much stronger path forward for integration and healing from my perspective. So it's not about changing a type. You don't change a type. You're always going to have a dominant type. That's like saying your core wounds will go away. You can heal your core wounds. They're still going to be there. It's just now that you're actually aware of them, you're not triggered by them, you can make conscious choices that are different from your default patterns, right? So that's what I feel like the Enneagram provides a pathway for. Do I think most people use it like that? Absolutely not. I think most people use it, again, as like a party trick. I'm an 8. I'm a, like the bad type, the mean one. and it's like, again, not mean. All the types have great, healthy and unhealthy kind of characteristics.
Right.
I think is really helpful too. That often I find triggers the crap out of people when they read the report. It shows you like, here's what you're really good at. And here's this like kind of shady shit over here that you're probably doing. And often, like I've done many coaching sessions with Enneagram. People are like, where do I start with this? How do I start using it? And I'm like, what pissed you off the most about your report? Start there. So I feel like it gets you like a gentle nudge in a direction, at least, to become the best version of you, knowing that you're always going to have this orientation to the world. It's just, are you actually aware of it? Do you know how it impacts you? And then, like we were talking about earlier, it's the same thing with working with other people. I know, here's Julie again. I know Julie has an orientation to be the thinker, like a 5 on an Enneagram, for example. Again, I'm not going to like say, I can never talk to Julie in person. I have to send her research in advance. Like, that's so limiting. That's so clunky, you know? But it's just, I don't know. I love it so much. It's one of my favorite tools, actually. I find it very emotionally resonant. And there are a lot of people out there that are producing content and interpretations of it that are extremely nuanced and integrated and really helpful to help with healing. And honestly, like integrating trauma.
Right.
That's what it is, right?
Right.
I talked a lot there. What's your experience with the Enneagram?
No, well, I would point to a similar part of it, the fact that it has movement and evolution and an evolutionary trajectory. It incorporates evolution. And I think that that's what I really appreciate about the Enneagram and what's possible with astrology also, by the way.
Yep.
And that it speaks to, yes, this is your default pattern. I found it to be very, very accurate for myself.
Yeah.
And it was a 4-wing 3, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And then it'll also provide, what low, you know, without being judgy on the self or other people, but like when we're struggling, our worst, and there's equality among all patterns. So it's not like this personal attack. It's like, hey guys, we've all got things to work on. If we don't work on it, we all fall on we all get into some other, and we get to see what that looks like so that we can say, oh shit, maybe I've got some things that are in my closet that I maybe am ignoring, and they're getting in the way of my ability to contribute, to be happy, and to contribute in a more successful way in my life. Successful not being necessarily, I'm not speaking to money, I'm talking about just collective, you know, largely. So that spectrum and addressing that immediately, I completely agree. And I love the Enneagram. It's kind of based on like the flower of life geometry, an understanding of we complete each other. And I'm always appreciative of any kind of testing that helps the individual to find themselves within an understanding and appreciating the collective, not one or the other. So I definitely think there's a lot to learn from the Enneagram, but I would love, maybe actually if we could put in the links or in the comments some resources that you might suggest.
Totally.
On the right, because it's so easy. There's so much of this testing. It is very commercialized, commoditized, and there's shallow stuff out there. To get more of the depth, more of the work, and the exciting, nuanced part.
Absolutely. And honestly, there are some extremely good Instagram accounts that are doing really nuanced thinking and creating really nuanced content around it. Just like another system, which is not a personality type assessment, but it to me feels like it could be in this bucket that we're not going to talk about it today, which is the Chakra System. Like, I think that if you start to study that and you've done some work to figure out what some of your patterns are, there's like a bevy of knowledge to learn there. And there are also people doing really great nuanced interpretations of that are very new. So I feel like there's so much out there right now. People are really starting to, again, interpret and use these tools in, like, I would say like level 10 as opposed to level 1. I feel like we've been stuck at like level 1 for a really long time. Many of these tools have been around for a very long time. And we've just been saying I'm a Gemini versus actually looking at all of my, natal chart, or I'm an Enneagram 8 versus looking at the whole universe of what each one of these tools has to offer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a look at human design, since it's a real popular one.
Oh,
I know the basic framework and a good amount on human design, but you know a lot about it.
Well,
So,
I don't want to say that I know a lot, because I think actually it's like a drop in the bucket compared to how complicated this system is.
what you like, where it may be limiting.
Yeah, I think human design was created by this Ru dude. Transmission and channeled or downloaded, or whatever you want to say. This system for understanding the self and others. And it really has a lot to do, well, first of all, it pulls from a lot of other ancient systems. Astrology, the Chinese I Ching, Kabbalah, Tree of Life, different things like that, different very old systems. It also claims to have roots in the genetic structure of humans. Okay, so like the literally like DNA helix, hexagrams, and all like how our DNA is expressed. And the idea is that based on where you, like in astrology, are born, what time you're born, and the actual geolocation of it, you create for yourself a human design chart. And what is contained in that chart is a variety of things. And I would say like it gets simple to super complex because there's so much information in this chart. And like astrology, it's actually still always pulling from astrology. So there are different types of ways to look at your information where it's like evolving and changing as the moon passed through gates, sun passed through, like all these things, right? So it's a bit of a mess to begin in. Again, there are excellent resources I can point you to, especially on Instagram, that are great places to start with this. But human design claims to give you the most detailed, individualized view of yourself, your unique expression. One of the things that it says about itself is that it's the science of differentiation. So yes, there are types and there are similarities among charts. Energy types, for example, there are 5 main energy types, and that's really like what you get energy from, how you are successful in life, and like where your energy is kind of like best used. Some main kind of qualities for how you're expressed and show up, and how much rest you need generally. That's going to be a whole swath of people that are going to have the same energy type as you, for example.
Right.
But we get further and further into this chart, and it gets more and more individualized. So there are a variety of factors that would take me 18 days to explain to you. There's literally like a textbook this big that's hard to digest, and that doesn't even get to like all of it. So I won't dig in, but I will say, after digging in just a little bit and doing some self-study with it, I really did feel individually seen on a new level from this system. And what I think it was particularly helpful for is understanding how my energy works.
Right.
So what I mean by that is, I'll give you the example. So I'm a projector energy type. I said there are these 5 energy types. What that tends to look like, and this is a very generalization because again, there's a lot more in my profile that is the unique expression of a projector energy type just for me, than every projector is going to look like this. So just have that disclaimer in mind. But a projector tends to be the guide and someone that can see things, thinks in systems, reflects truth back to people, can point out how things can be improved, is really like a natural healer or therapist or coach or leader. And at the same time, they get really zapped if they do a lot, if they're stuck in the grind, if they're the one executing on things. They kind of need to be on top or like kind of look down and see how things are going and orchestrate versus being in the labor all the time and proving their worth through doing. And what happens is our society only thinks proving your worth through doing is what gets you to be successful. So a lot of times projectors are conditioned in that vein in society, and we burn out. And we become really bitter and really resentful and really exhausted and just like totally depleted. And it's because we've used our energy incorrectly, because our society says there's one way to use energy. There's one way to show up. It's to push and drive and prove and fix and solve and do. And that's honestly, I don't think how humans in general are supposed to show up, but certainly not this projector energy type, which tends to need a lot more rest. And here's a key. Here's the kicker when I knew, oh yes, this is actually me. It has it has this kind of strategy to it, which is that you have to wait for an invitation before you can be effective in providing your guidance. So I read that part and listened to some of the transmission, and I was like, holy shit. This is describing why I have always felt so resentful when I can see the path forward. I know what patterns people are expressing. I know exactly what's coming. I know how to avoid it. And I tell. And because I'm an Enneagram 8, I tell loudly and directly. And I mean, honestly, and in the past, this has like gotten me to feel like no one values me. No one values my opinion. And it's because I was never waiting to be invited. Now, that doesn't mean someone literally has to ask me, Bree, what do you think? Although that's lovely and helpful. It's more of an energetic invitation. So I have to discern, are people actually open to hearing my guidance right now? A lot of times now I'll actually ask permission. Like, I have some thoughts on this. Would you like to hear them? And then if I can tell, people are not like, like they're actually wholeheartedly like, yeah, of course I want to hear what you have to say. When I give my guidance, then it's received and able to be used on a whole new level. And I know that's a lot of energetic stuff there that I've just dropped, but that's just to show you at the skin deep level of this energy type, what's available to you in human design. There is like an infinite universe of more depth to it. But if you can just like assign yourself with your energy type alone or your authority, which is like a whole nother story, it can totally change your view and how you prioritize and show up in life. And that's just like the skin deep version of the system.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. I love that. And exactly as we're, looking at all of these tools, identifying where each one kind of, how it can, at least for us, not to say everybody will have their different experience, although I do think that there definitely some similarity in the fact that the Enneagram has that transformative, identifying those core wounds and that kind of movement. And that's a key thing of understanding kind of that superficial personality. The human design, exactly as you're saying, and it's so true, and you'll see so much around that, understanding energy types and starting to just bring your awareness to understanding yourself and other people that way. Well, that on its own, I feel, expands consciousness dramatically. No matter, right, just generally, we're starting to have an energetic conversation, and which is much more profound and larger than where we've been able to have conversations around the self before.
Yeah.
So, that's awesome. And it has, where would you say the limitations are maybe for human design that you are aware of, or where you think it gets trappy?
Trappy. I think just like every other tool, people will go skin deep and then they get stuck in identifying with their type or their authority, and they use it so literally. I think the other con with it is it's extremely, it's so overwhelming, and it's a whole other language. It's like learning a totally new language, and that's a lot. Okay. So I feel like with a lot of self-discovery and self-development, we're off doing it mostly on our own, and it's a lot of work. And to spend the time like I have, or like many other people have, to actually study this stuff and try to understand the system, let alone your stuff in the system, it takes years. And like, people don't have time for that. So it's hard to figure out how to use it also. While there is a ton of different information in it for you, it again is a little esoteric in how to use it. Like I gave an example of, the energy type being something that you could easily master, but the rest of it is really obtuse, I think, for the general person. And so it's hard to riddle out, understand, and put into practice beyond some of these high level things that are in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a great, I think, from a counsel perspective, when it comes to, it's kind of like, get introduced to it, get familiar with your type. You can run a test. And if it interests you,
yeah,
if it speaks to you in some way, you'll know. And that's always the great thing I find about all these tools also. It's not about one being best. It's just, well, and maybe we'll talk about that on the end, how to choose which tool is best for you at a given moment.
Right. Well, I feel like, Carly, that some of these tools, like, you can use on your own. Like, I feel like the Enneagram, there are great books out there. You could use it on your own. Is it always helpful to have an expert, to have a coach to help you see things you don't see? 100%. Right. However, there are some of these systems where it's actually really hard to use on your own, that you would, and it's not, I'm saying it's not worth learning it on your own. Of course it is. It's super fascinating from my perspective. However, there are some things, systems like astrology, I would say, and human design in particular, those two, where you could go from 0 to 1,000 in your understanding of you only if you work with an expert. Because these people, I mean, you can study for years and not be on the level of some of these experts that just fluidly understand these systems, like inside their body. Like, it's a whole nother level. And so I would say, if you're interested in like astrology, which we'll get to in a second, or human design, like, oh my gosh, get a reading done. Like, really dive in with somebody who is one of the experts in it, because that will help you so much more than you struggling on your own to figure it out. Whereas some of these other things like Enneagram, I think it's a little bit more accessible.
Right. Totally. Completely. Yeah. And it's just not worth it. And there's too much that can happen in the process of trying to understand. You can learn about it on your own, again, to expand awareness. But there's a difference between expanding awareness and then what we tend to do when we take any kind of test is we get a little, it's that over-attachment happens very fast. And so if we get over-attached, especially to an interpretation that could be, generally we don't want to, even when it's right, but we definitely don't want to get attached to it when it's wrong. So it's like, let's just, I agree. I think that there are, as we get to more advanced tools, this is why we have each other and people that enjoy studying and teaching and reading for other people.
I mean, I think that's a great perspective too, because there are entire facets of these systems, like the narrative Enneagram, for example, that literally teaches you about the Enneagram through narrative storytelling of people sharing their experiences of what it's like in real life scenarios to be a certain type or to use the system in a certain way. Like, that is really powerful, as opposed to just reading a book about it, right? Or just looking at your own profile, but like actually getting a fuller picture of how it's expressed in real life and humanity is, I think, where it's at. And that's why I think sometimes experts who have worked with thousands of people and have seen thousands of variations of these things can just help you up-level your knowledge so quickly.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I'm curious, you know way more than I do when it comes to astrology. I feel like I'm a fledgling astrology baby. I started to get into it more because it is so inherent in some of these other systems that I appreciate, like human design. And I have been a subscriber to the Chani app now for several months, and like listening to my design and all of these things and digging into my Chiron return and all this stuff that I have, it just was completely over my head. And I'm just trying to absorb it little by little by osmosis. But I want to know, you know, it's only been recently that I've started to go through like my entire chart and really understand the depth of it, that I felt like, oh, this actually really is me. This really does describe my experience and what I've evolved to, which is really interesting. But before, I always felt like astrology, it was like, I don't know if this really speaks to me or not. I don't know what my moon is, you know, all these things. I only knew my sun sign for so long. So I want to hear from you. What's it been like to use astrology as a self-discovery tool, and what do you think is amazing about it?
Well, I'll first kind of share, my own experience too with astrology, because I had a similar thing. I was a Taurus, like growing up, and I read, and as much as I'm imaginary, I like to read a lot of things. I'm always entertaining ideas. It doesn't matter how out there it is. I'm like, maybe I like it. But I read about myself as a Taurus, and I was like, it's just not me.
Yeah.
You know, it was like, she doesn't like change, you know, into luxury. And I was like,
that's what I was thinking. I'm like, this does not describe you.
And so this superficial, I was like, astrology sucks. It's stupid. And then when I was 19, actually, I was in a world religions class in college. And my professor had written his whole dissertation. He said he wanted to do my astrology chart, but like my full astrology chart. And I was like, I'm just not really into all of that. And he had actually written, he was getting his PhD from UCLA, and he was going to write his dissertation on essentially proving astrology is bullshit, right? That's what he wanted to write it on. And he was researching for like 5 years, long time, essentially came back and said, astrology is actually the most accurate representation that we have into the human psyche and how people work that exists. And there's a reason it has been around for thousands and thousands of years. And how we built so many frameworks on this understanding. And so then he drew my chart, and this was just from a computer. He printed out a 50 page, it was a book. I mean, it was like this, not that big, but I mean, it was like that thick. And I'm reading through this packet, and I was like, it was like the first time I ever, similar to what you said with the other one, I actually felt seen.
Yeah.
It was like, oh my God, I don't think anybody has ever understood me. And it was an understanding of how I knew myself too. So it wasn't like, oh, I must be. It was like, finally, something actually sees me. And it was very interesting, but it was in the details. That was back in the day with astrology. And then I've always kind of been interested, but never really got that into it really until the last 2 years when I started to go through my own very strange experiences. That all of a sudden astrology came in as it I don't know. It's like, sometimes we resonate with certain perspectives and ways of gathering information. I used to love reading a lot of books on science and this and consciousness and molecules. And then all of a sudden, all of that dropped. And the only thing that made sense was quantum and astrology and understanding consciousness in this larger cosmic way.
Yes.
And astrology, I like to think of how I describe it is that it's a snapshot of the universe when your energy comes into this world. Yep. And when we ask, well, what do the planets have to do with me? Again, we're so disconnected from where we come from. But the planets have gravity, have weight. There's an understanding of this galaxy. There's a reason that we have this race to space. And we've always had a fascination with the stars because they live in us and they impact us constantly. The moon impacts the tide. It impacts water. We're mostly water. So it's like we can look at very concrete things that exist today that show us that it does impact us. But how much and what does that mean and how far do we go with it?
Yeah.
All the more excitement for us to really look into it and see.
Right. I mean, there are neutrinos funneling through literally our body all of the time. There's literally stardust particles.
Exactly. The sun is
going through all of the space between our electrons all of the freaking time. Exactly. So to think that the cosmos is not impacting us and our physical bodies and our energy literally constantly is silly.
Ludicrous. Yeah.
It's constantly actually affecting us. It's not just something that's out there.
Exactly.
In you.
It's in you all the time, and understanding your energy, I call it your energy footprint. Like we have our DNA, which is in our DNA, by the way, but we have our biology, our psychology, and our energy. The most true, the truest thing that we really are at the foundation is our energy, and our biology, and then our psychology. And so astrology is really just the beginning of understanding that energetic blueprint that holds your karma. It holds the energy of the karma, so to speak. All of the history of this universe is in the stars, and it's inside of us. Oh, hi, Katie.
We didn't want to sit over there anymore. Apparently, we're boring him.
Yes.
Crazy dog.
But our charts, I think what's similar, as you were saying before, the astrology chart really should be done with an interpreter. And I do find I like to help people even less so. It's not about holding on to it. It's understanding this is what you came in with to clear. It's about transcending it.
Yes.
You cannot truly transcend it until you've dealt with it.
Okay, I just want to pause there for a second, because this is a revelation that's come clear for me recently too. When I had a really good astrology reading in Costa Rica a couple months ago, and I just, before you continue, I have to make this point because it's so true. I feel like one of the reasons why people avoid buying in to astrology is they feel like, oh, it's my fate's designed, it's written in the stars, so that means I have no free will. That means it's all predestined. And I don't think that's actually the case. What is the case is what's predestined is this journey that's going to keep serving up opportunities for you to learn and grow and integrate shit and heal from. That's what's happening. The choices that you make on a daily basis are your own. You can run fast at that stuff and use it as an opportunity. All it is constant opportunities for you. That's what's predestined. Opportunities for you. Whether you take them or you avoid them is up to you. And it's not good or bad either way. I mean, there's like, all these lifetimes going. If we do achieve or don't achieve what we set out to in this lifetime, it is what it is, right? But you have the choices in the moment, but there are just these opportunities served up to you. Right. And that to me is how I'm viewing astrology now. You still have to do the work. They can talk about Virgo and whatever right now. You still have to do the work to be actually organized and to take advantage of the opportunity of the energy that's happening right now. That's how I'm seeing it. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of that. And I think the question, I almost want to bucket three different kind of positions on that. So you said opportunities.
Yeah. School me. I'm just a baby astrologer.
No, it's not. No, works.
No, I'm serious. I'm like ready for it.
I mean, it's still, I'm slowly evolving, and really where I'm most interested in psychology and how I'm starting to really work on my own capacity to help other people is really around when you get to the point in your chart where you are contributing to the collective. So you've worked on yourself, you know who you are, you have your self-value, you've disrupted, you've come into your ability to take care of yourself, you understand that you're part of something bigger than just you, you've done your deep work, your Scorpio house of transformation, of dealing with all the real darkness of yourself and the collective.
Yes.
Gone on the spirituality, higher learning, break the rules, empowerment, and now you're ready to come into the house of Capricorn, which is, hey, how are you contributing and showing up as a leader now? Mm-hmm. And so that's where I really like to kind of work with people, and what I've been focusing on. Now, there are many different components, different people that are most interested in different parts of the chart and how to use it. But when you say opportunities, it's really interesting, and really getting clear also on this idea of free will versus determined.
Yeah.
I'm still very much exploring myself, right? But it's a big question. I think there is a certain fate in the stars. There are certain events. There's a certain energy. I have a teacher that calls it just simply the impulse. Mm-hmm. Accurate, right? So the impulse can manifest in any way. And the impulse can be transmuted and alchemized, right? But it's going to happen. The energy impulse will hit. Mm-hmm. Now, how prepared are you to use it in a creative, constructive way for yourself and the collective, or not? And actually, so we have this illusion of free will, but free will oftentimes is really, I would say true free will is actually when we clear what is determined. We accept our blueprint and we transcend. Now we're truly free. But what we often consider free will is really just actually being manipulated to not deal with our karma or deal with ourselves. And so sometimes we're not actually making the choice of empowerment. We're making the choice of repression or avoidance and not dealing with certain cosmic events that need to be. And so actually our free will can really screw up our ability to transcend and truly be free. And there's an acceptance too. I think it also can kind of come into, we are always co-creating. And when we acknowledge that there's something bigger than us, if we don't surrender to the universe, so to speak, if we don't surrender to this idea that this is all so much bigger than us, then we're in our ego, and truly what we all crave is to really surrender. You know, it's always what we want is just, who do we trust? We trust ourselves and trust the universe. Trust that if we're acting out of integrity, we'll be able to transcend into true freedom, which is acceptance.
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, I love that perspective. I love that. You made me, you reminded me of that, like saying we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. So I feel like what you called up for me there was, yeah, we in this human form are kind of disconnected from something that's so much bigger than us, but our like spirit isn't really. So it's like really hoping that we'll get our shit together, basically. You know, like, please look, there's all this whole path. There's all these opportunities. There's this whole journey that you signed up for, that we signed up for. Get on board. Damn it. On the bus.
There's another astrologer that I really love. She speaks to it in such a beautiful way that she's like, if you don't get to know your astrology before you transcend, if you give yourself the illusion of free will, you become what we call an astrology bottom feeder. And what it means is that as the stars are doing their thing, they're impacting you. So when your life is getting rattled left and right, or like this state of the world right now, right? Like it's all in the stars, guys. And when your life goes through a huge unraveling and a huge disruption, check out that chart, because you might think it's all these really random, weird events. It's usually not. It's usually Saturn coming around, like handing it to you. And the only way that we can really get out of that suffering of these moments in time that just feel like, why is this all happening right now? Is when we accept that there are certain things that are determined and that are meant to happen, but we can choose how we deal with them. And that's our true choice. That's when we are initiated into our higher self, our higher trajectories, and free, or we're just going to repeat the same cycles over and over and over again until we get it.
Yes.
Because we've made that free will choice to not deal with it.
Yeah. Okay. So going back to kind of the scheme that we've had so far, which is like, okay, on a scale of 1 to 1,000,000, how do you use this thing? How should people start with it? What are the drawbacks of it? What do you think?
Well, I know I would say everybody should do their full, like, if you can get like a full computer reading. And if you are drawn to astrology, I think just having an awareness of the stars and the fact that they impact us and learning about them.
Yeah.
That on its own will start to trigger things within you. And if you want a mirror of your charts, and work with an astrologer, like you'd say with human design, and have somebody go through your full chart with you to understand, especially if you're going through, I think astrology can really help if you find you're facing the same obstacle over and over and over again.
Yeah.
If you're looking for purpose, sort of your purpose, your work, what to really, where to put your energy, where energy really works with you. In that way, go to your chart. But I think mostly when you feel like life is trying to teach you something because it's hard and you don't know what it is, I would say that's the time to look to the stars. Yeah. Because it might be something that it can help you to see more clearly that might feel like just this randomness.
Yeah.
Right now.
I would definitely recommend the Chani app too, because it's updated every week. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think especially I do the paid version. I want to say it's like $12 a month or something. I feel like it gets so much detail in there. And then they do a really good job of what we've been talking about the whole time, which is, I feel like I'm selling this app, but I'm not really good. I'm a user. I'm a proud user. Yeah. they do a really good job of helping you integrate. So there are meditations and suggestions for how to change your altar, and journal prompts and things like that are like, actually, okay, go reflect on this, use it, integrate it into your life. Here's how to, practice self-care right now, which is really interesting to me and very supportive, I've found.
Totally.
Yeah.
I think some apps, it's a great like starting place again. Otherwise, having the full read. And I think just start to learn, I'd say to start reading about the stars, what they represent. Each of the planets holds a part of us. And so it's really important that we start to expand into understanding them in that way, as kind of their mythology and what these stories are very old.
Oh,
yeah. For a long time for a reason.
Yeah.
So, okay, cool. Yeah, so that's astrology. We're at an hour. What do you think? Is there one more that we should cover? I do want to, by the way, I want us to answer at the end how to choose what tool is best for you at a given moment.
I think I can do like a 3-minute Gene Keys.
Gene Keys, let's do it.
Okay, yeah. Gene Keys is one of my, what?
I said, you're going to just give us an overview. What is it? Good things and.
Yeah, Gene Keys, amazing. Again, another system for you to use for healing and integration. It provides what's called a hologenetic profile. Gene Keys is based on the Chinese I Ching system, but it also has some crossover with human design in that the man that downloaded the Gene Keys worked closely with the man that came up with the human design system for many years. But Richard Rudd, who's the man that wrote the Gene Keys book or transmitted it, whatever he'll say, he basically came up with this hologenetic profile that takes, just like the human design or just like astrology would, a snapshot of kind of where astrology is and where the I Ching gates are during your time of birth. But we didn't talk about this in detail, but human design looks at your time of birth and approximately I want to say it's 80 some or 90 days before you are actually birthed,
right.
As kind of this conscious, unconscious duality in your profile and system. The Gene Keys does that as well. So it looks at your location and time of birth, but it pulls it only through the lens of the Chinese I Ching gates. And so your profile doesn't have anything like in human design where you talk about energy type or all that stuff. What the Gene Keys does is it presents a pathway for healing yourself, basically, and for integration. And the assumption is there are these 3 stages for each one of your gates. And they call them spheres based on how this thing looks. And it has a particular gate number and line. So it's your unique expression in that gate based on all of your astrology, basically. What the Gene Keys does is it has 3 different pathways. I believe it's activation sequence, which is really like self-discovery and understanding of self. It's the Venus sequence, which is really understanding yourself in relationship with other people. So this means love, but it's a whole bunch of emotional and social and spiritual intelligence as well. And then the Pearl sequence, which is really about, I would say, your contribution and prosperity in the world. So it's like self, other, society, basically. Okay. And you go through each of these sequences, and the idea is through contemplation, which we talked about a lot last time, you actually learn about each of these Gene Keys. And the idea is through contemplation, practice, and integration, you go from a shadow level of that Gene Key and that energetic expression to what's called a gift level, to acidic level, which is almost like pure light being. And through that process of kind of ascending through integration, you actually start to alter the DNA in your body. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why it's called the Gene Keys. It's also very aligned with the hexagrams and the I Ching gates and all that stuff. It has the parallels just like in human design. And the idea is through contemplation of these Gene Keys, and each of these Gene Keys is based on the Chinese I Ching, which is an ancient divination system. And it kind of correlates with the astrology, changes every 3 to 5 days. We're in a different gate. I think it's maybe it might be 4 days. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But each one of them in the gene keys has this gorgeous written story about how our energy as humans and as a collective is expressed in each of the levels within each gate. And so you can identify for yourself, like kind of where you are in there and see what's possible. And so there's a lot of it's like alchemy at work. Okay, Carly, I know you like to talk about alchemy, but it's literally alchemy at work. It's like,
well, it's ascension keys is what you're describing.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. So I'm like spacing out on having an exact example for you, but it's again one of those things that makes you feel hopeful and extremely seen, but also a little bit like, what the H is this guy talking about? And I have the book. I would recommend getting the book. It's amazing, the Gene Keys book. But one of the things I found really useful is actually going through the sequences on their website, and they're like $100 each sequence, which is relatively affordable for what's in there. And the reason why I like that so much is because it's full of transmissions and you hear it being spoken to you as opposed to going and reading it. And I don't know about you, but there's a whole nother level of activation. If I can sit down and just like fold laundry and listen to what's possible for me as a human in a particular gene key, if I like actually do the work and contemplate this thing and integrate it into my life, it just, apart from all the other systems, this has made me cry and crack open the most because of that language and the way it's transmitted and the way that you can actually access it. It just like opens channels in me somehow. So I would say, like, if you don't want to identify as a type or anything like that, because it's not about that at all. It's literally a path to ascension, like you're saying. So it's really not about going out and saying, well, I have a 44.6 gate in my, life's purpose sphere. So that's not what it's about. This is super unique. And the whole point is that you contemplate just like this amazing information about each gene key. It's unlike the others. So it's
beautiful.
I would say the clearest path for doing work and the most esoteric in terms of giving you a profile, which is maybe a signal to us that that's actually the key. The key is not to say you're an INFP, good luck to you. The key is to say, here's all this amazing knowledge. You could read every single one of the 64 gene keys, of which many wouldn't be in your profile. And that would be better for you and your personal development than taking a test and claiming that you're an INFP.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I got my hello.
Uh-oh.
Doing that, yeah.
You want to talk about when to pick one?
Yeah, and it's interesting as I go through. Well, I think we went through a process today on how to pick one.
Kind of.
An intention, so to speak, of kind of where. But first, what would you say as far as where you think? How should people pick what tool?
I mean, it depends on what your intention is. Sometimes people use self-discovery tools so that they know what to write on a resume and they can collaborate better with their teammates. Those are not bad things to use them for. If that's the case, then I would say, Enneagram is phenomenal for that. Astrology might be a little harder for you to apply in that area, though I think it would be useful. Knowing your human design energy type and your authority, which we didn't get into detail about, could be really simple things that would help you excel in work and in life and not feel totally depleted and resentful. That's what I would point to for those things. It's like skin deep human design or Enneagram all day for just showing up a little bit better in your life.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we all are drawn to trust yourself in the process. The goal of using any of these tools is always to go deeper within the self and the collective and to expand our consciousness. And so I think we are where we are and we're always spiraling. And sometimes we have to look at some of these I call them superficial, but they're not. We live in a superficial world. We're interacting in very superficial ways all the time. And so there's a level of that. As we get more multidimensional, there is a dimension that's very superficial. And so I think, if that's like you said, I love how you pointed that out, for team orientations, to just kind of understand group dynamics a little bit better on an everyday basis. I would say Enneagram and Myers-Briggs are helpful to just kind of be aware of that space. And then as I'd say astrology more so from I think understanding your karma, not just in this life, but in the lives before, and collectively understanding how your astrology works within a collective astrology. So that's just really expanding our consciousness and kind of our history, our really big cosmic history, and developing a relationship with that. So you'll know when that starts to really pull you in. And meanwhile, in your everyday life, you can, work on it. Human design, totally, I agree. There's different levels of it depending on how you want to use it. And I love hearing Gene Keys as ascension. When you're ready to let go of the self or really like move past identity and move past the karma, transcend, so to speak, and ascend. It sounds like Gene Keys is a wonderful resource to help accelerate that process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we went in the right order. We did like
right. I know. As we're going through, I was like, what?
We did it.
We did it.
I will say like one final thing from me, which has been really interesting, working with people one-on-one, using some of these systems, and I will smush them together because I'm the queen of smushing stuff together. Of course. INFP, ha. So I just had to make that joke. It was fascinating to me. I don't know if other people would be pulling these kind of coincidences. I'll be very generous and call them coincidences, correlations. I don't know. Together, if they didn't have the skill that I have of like really seeing all the patterns. That's like one of the things that is really easy for me, is seeing patterns and connecting dots, smushing things together. What I have noticed in using Enneagram and human design together in coaching, healing, is really fascinating. So human design's like snapshot of you at birth and before birth, based on, remember, like your birth date, time, and location. And it gives you the picture of your energy type and all these gates and everything with so much detail. And then Enneagram really does show, as your adult self taking this assessment, what your underlying motivations and core wounds are. So people would theorize, I feel like if they weren't spiritual, that there's one system that's like predicting that you're going to be a certain way because of when and where you were born. And then there's a system that is like, based on your actual life, this is how you see the world. What I have noticed, and when I combine those two systems together, is that I see so much of what's in the Enneagram in the human design chart.
Yeah, they all overlap in a crazy way.
What's fascinating to me, like if you were not a spiritual person, you would be like, that doesn't make any sense, because to make that leap means that what shows up in your Enneagram was probably always going to show up in your Enneagram as your default.
Remember free will. We get back to you.
So I just want to throw that out there. Like the things that triggered your reaction might be different depending on different circumstances, but your reaction was probably always going to be that reaction. I know that's a giant leap. I have a very small sample size, but the evidence that I've seen in a very small sample size is extremely specific and overwhelming. And every time I run into a new encounter, I'm like, holy shit, how is this possible? That literally what was written in the stars is expressed in your default orientation to the world. So I just want to throw that out there for food for thought as something that like picking one system is great. They're all overwhelming to a certain extent. So start with one. But if you're really into this stuff and really into healing and knowing that your identity and personality is fluid and that you can always change and grow, it's also very interesting to overlap this information together in these different systems to get a different level of validation, to map different patterns, and to really see a fuller picture. So I would just leave on that. That was my final sentiment. Unless you have other questions.
No, I think we're good. And I would echo. I've seen them in the Kobe, like in the business world tests, overlapping with human design for work. So the BCG or whatever it's called, I can't remember. But literally, it's the exact same. And I was like, one is it? So it is. I appreciate you kind of adding that as a button here at the end to understand they all complement each other. And you will find if you're living in alignment with yourself, if you are kind of coming into your true self, understanding and expanding, that there will be a lot of consistency.
It's wild.
Yeah.
And again, it's not to say like you get stuck in it and attached to it. It's information.
It's information.
It's information for awareness so that you have choices.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Bree, for a wonderful conversation today. And we will put some links. We'll just kind of maybe we'll just add them at the, tomorrow over the next few days into the comments on all of the resources. Sometimes it's nice for people to just know if you've already sorted through what resources you like, and I'll do the same. And we will talk again soon. And if you have any questions for Bree on anything with coaching and on healing yourself, finding your possibilities, coming into yourself, this expanded version of self, and I encourage you to reach out to Bree as well.
For having Carly.
Everybody, stay strong.
Bye.